Hi, this is Ron Cipcic, and in this particular segment we're going to take a look at measurement of the U.S. unemployment rate. We'll focus our attention on U3, which is the official measurement of unemployment, but we're also going to be taking a look at a secondary measurement called U6. Now, to understand unemployment, you first have to understand that there's a big difference between the category not working and unemployed. True or false? All people who are not working are unemployed. The answer to that is false. True or false? All people who are unemployed are not working. The answer to that is true, at least in the above ground economy. In the underground economy, there might be people, actually there could be people that are telling the government they're unemployed when they're in fact working, but we'll ignore that category right now. Now, what types of people would be not working and not unemployed? In other words, they would be inside the outside circle, but outside the inside circle. Well, I've listed some of these here, jotted them in. We've got retirees, we've got students. You know, think of a sixth grader. The sixth grader is not working, and the sixth grader is not counted as unemployed. Think of my mother who's retired. She's almost, I think she's 79, pushing 80. She is not working, and she is not counted as unemployed. And then there are disabled folks. There are people who cannot work because of a disability. They're not working, but they're not counted as unemployed. There are also disabled people who are counted as unemployed because they meet the definition, which I'll share with you later, or they're employed. But you could imagine that there's categories of people that cannot work because of their disability, and they're going to fall in this outside circle, but not on the inside circle. And then, of course, there could be homemakers and people that are staying home with children, and these folks are working very hard in the home, but they're counted as not working and not unemployed. Okay? So folks can fall in this outside circle, but not fall on the inside circle. And this is you'll see as we do a problem later on that this can be a very large number of people. Now, if you are unemployed, we assume you are not working. We would admit that there are probably people receiving unemployment benefits or telling the government they're unemployed when in fact they're working in the underground illegal economy. For instance, someone might be dealing drugs and yet be going to the unemployment office basically telling the government that they're not working. In fact, they are employed. They're just not employed in an occupation that is reportable. Okay? So what we'll say, and we'll just assume that if you're unemployed, you're not working, but we will not flip that and say if you're not working, you're unemployed. Okay? Now, how do we actually measure unemployment? Who is counted among the unemployed? Let's take a look at this. To be officially unemployed in the United States, you have to meet two basic criteria. So there are two criteria you have to meet. One, you must be seeking work and have sought work within the last 4 weeks. Now this is a survey system. This is important to note that when the U.S. government measures unemployment, it doesn't go to every household. Remember, for the government to go to every household, that's a very monumental task. That's done once every 10 years. That's called a census. The federal government, the U.S. Department of Labor, cannot contact every U.S. household monthly to evaluate their labor market status. So what the U.S. Department of Labor does is it takes a survey. It takes a survey of some 60 to 70,000 households. Now this is done scientifically. It's random. It meets all the criteria that good statistics would have. And then from this labor market survey of 60 to 70,000 households monthly, the federal government puts together data, puts together a picture of the unemployed. To be unemployed, again, you have to be seeking work and have sought work within the last 4 weeks. Secondly, you must be available for work in the survey week. In other words, in the week that you're surveyed, which is this week, you're ready to work. So say that I'm with the U.S. Department of Labor. I call up and I introduce myself and I say, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Would you mind answering a few questions? You say no. And I then begin to ask you questions. I ask you, are you working? And you say, no, I'm not working. and I'm then going to ask some follow-up questions. I'm going to ask you, have you sought work within the last 4 weeks, within the last month? And if you say yes, I'm going to probably ask you some follow-up questions. Well, what did you do to seek work? Well, you respond, I put out a few applications. I actually physically went to a couple locations, filled out applications. I also filled out a few applications online. That is evidence that you've been seeking work. By the way, this is a voluntary survey, and we actually trust the people we're interviewing. Could they lie? Could they lie to us? Yes. But we're going to believe that what they're telling us is true. Then I'm going to ask another question. I'm going to say, if you were offered a job this week, would you be able to take it? Would you take it? And if you say, yes, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to start. If a company offered me a job, I would be willing to go in and begin orientation and get going, then you're available for work. However, if you answer that you're not available this week, that maybe you have something going this week, you're going to be traveling next week, you've got to deflea the dog in 3 weeks, you got to visit grandma in 4 weeks, and you'll be ready to go in another month, well, the point is you will not be counted as available. To be unemployed in the United States, you must meet both criteria. You have, notice it's a plus, it's and, it's not or. You must meet the seeking and available rule. This is a very important foundation of our unemployment system. In other words, you're not only available to work, but you've made an effort to find work recently. Okay? Now there are a few exceptions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the exceptions because there are exceptions. They're not as important. But an exception that does come up would be people on temporary layoff. We're going to run into people who have been temporarily laid off from their company. They have a recall date. They know they're going to be coming back to their company, but in the week we survey them, they're going to tell us something like, no, I'm not really available for work because I'm waiting to be recalled to such and such a company, and I expect to be recalled on such and such a date. Well, this person is not going to meet the available for work rule. What do? We're still going to count them as unemployed. So temporary people on temporary layoffs are actually what? They're actually counted. Okay, they may not meet the seeking and available rule. We wouldn't expect that they would. If you're expecting to get recalled to your company, you're probably not out looking for a job. You're not probably going to tell somebody you're ready to work before your recall date. Okay? Now, how do we actually measure the unemployment rate? Now again, I'm emphasizing here we're measuring something called whoops, just made a little mistake there. Means I get to use my eraser, which I always love to use. And this unemployment rate that I'm speaking about is something called U3, and this is the official unemployment rate that you hear reported every month. Okay? I'm also, as I said earlier, going to share with you an unemployment rate called U6, which is a broader measure of unemployment. Some people like to cite it. We'll see that they like to cite it usually for political reasons. Okay, so back to our regular programming. How do you measure U3, the basic unemployment rate that the government publishes, federal government publishes every month? You take the number unemployed, subject to our definition up here, and you divide it by something called the labor force. Now, let's talk about what we mean by the labor force. To be in the labor force, you have to meet one of two criteria. You either have to be employed full-time or part-time, doesn't matter. If you're working an hour a week for pay, couple hours a week for pay, the government counts you as employed. So notice there is no distinction between full employment and part-time employment. There's no distinction between fulfilling employment and unfulfilling employment. You could be grossly underemployed. You could have a master's degree in business and be working working the counter at McDonald's, and you're still counted as employed, even though you're probably overqualified for that job. So the employed is a very broad definition, full or part-time employment, and then we're also going to add to that the number unemployed. So the number unemployed, this is very important, the number unemployed is part of our labor force. Okay? Now there are some qualifications we want to note. You have to be 16 years or older. 15-year-olds who are seeking work, available for work, are not counted as unemployed, even though they're fitting the bill. If you're working at 15, I had a job when I was 15, you're not counted as employed. So anyone under 16 is categorically ignored. The reason for that is if we included most 15-year-olds, if we included the 15-year-olds we ran into in the survey process, or the 14-year-olds or even 13-year-olds who might be seeking work, available for work, or have a job, what we would generally see is, because most of them are unemployed, and far and away most of them are unemployed, they would make the unemployment data look worse. So we like to leave people out of the data who are generally not expected to find work. Okay? We're also going to only count civilian people who are civilian, either employed in the civilian workforce or they're unemployed seeking civilian work. The point is we're going to ignore the military. We're going to leave people in the military out of the equation. We're also going to leave out of the equation people who are institutionalized. So to be in the labor force, you have to be non-institutionalized. You might be incarcerated in prison. Maybe you're in prison for 8 years for some crime you've committed, and you work in the prison and you earn a little bit of income for that. Maybe they pay you in cigarettes, or they pay you in some sort of coupon that allows you to buy something in the prison store. The point I'm trying to make is you're not counted either as unemployed or employed if you're institutionalized. This could be a prison. It could be some sort of long-term health facility. You're ignored, basically, for labor market purposes. Okay? Now, let's do an example here of an unemployment problem to get a feel for how these calculations are made. I want to walk you through the numbers here. So let's talk about a hypothetical economy called out of luck-a-land. Out of luck-a-land, and we'll abbreviate out of luck-a-land with the OL. All right? Now, out of luck-a-land is not as large as the United States, so we only survey 10,000 household members. Maybe we survey 6,000 households, and we actually get to speak to 10,000 people. So we've surveyed 10,000 household members, and they're all 16 years old or older. They're civilian. They're not institutionalized. In other words, we're not going to talk to anybody if they're less than 16 years old, if they're in the military, or anything like that, or if we call someone and they happen to be institutionalized. We're not going to talk to people like that. We're going to politely move on. Now, of the 10,000 people that we talked to, 8,000 are working. Okay? Now note I've made a little note here that in interviewing these 8,000 people who are working, let's suppose we find out that 500 of the 8,000, so this 500 is in the 8,000, are underemployed. Underemployed means they're not working as many hours as they want. They'd like to work full-time, but they're maybe only getting 20 hours a week. Now there are people out there who are working part-time who want to work part-time. They're not underemployed. They're working exactly what they would want to work. We're talking about people who would want to work full-time, but who are only working part-time. Okay, these are called the underemployed. This is going to come into play later on. Of the 2,000 people who are not working, 450 of these folks are homemakers. Homemakers are not counted as unemployed. We run into 400 retirees. They are not counted as unemployed. We run into 350 high school and college students who are devoting themselves to their studies, and they're not seeking and available because they're not in the seeking and available category. They're not counted as unemployed. They're not working, but they're not unemployed. We do run into 300 people who identify themselves as seekers and who say they're currently available to work. Now these could fit into the other. I mean, these could be there could be high school and college students in here, but these are high school and college students who identify themselves as seeking and available. We count them. So these folks are going to be counted as unemployed. We run into 250 people who identify themselves as discouraged workers. Now, here's how you characterize a discouraged worker. This is going to be somebody you interview who probably says they're available for work, that they would like a job. But when we ask them when is the last time you looked for work, they're going to tell us something outside the 1 month window. So they're going to say something like, yeah, I'm ready to work, I want to work, but I haven't looked for work in 6 months. Or I haven't looked for work in a year. We are not going to count them as unemployed because they do not meet the seeking and available rule. Because of their discouragement, they have given up looking. We also have 250 people who are temporarily laid off. These folks are going to fit in because they are an exception. Remember, temporary layoffs are an exception. So we count them as unemployed even though they do not meet the seeking and available rule. Now, what do we got? Let's take a look. I'm going to use my fancy smancy scrolling feature, and I am going to scroll up. We have we have 8,000 people working. We have 550 people. We have 500 people. Let me use my fancy smancy scrolling feature and scroll back down. Notice we have 550 people who fit the bill as unemployed. They come from this category and they come from this category, right? So 550 unemployed people. Let's go ahead and move this up. So 550 goes in the numerator. I can do better than that. Let's use the erase feature. Okay, so 550 people are in the numerator. Those same 550 people have to be in the what? Denominator. Because remember, the unemployed are part of the labor force. This is the unemployed according to a U3 definition. And then we put the unemployed in the denominator, add that to the 8,000 people who are working. Didn't say anything about them having to work full-time, part-time, or full-time. What is this? This is your labor force, and we are very close. 550 divided by 8550 equals, I just happen to have that number, 6.4% unemployment in out-of-luck-a-land. Officially. Again, this is a U3 number. Now, this is relatively high by U.S. standards. It's not exceptionally high. It's relatively high. Unemployment rates of 4 to 5% in the 4 to 5% range are considered normal. When we get above 5%, into the 6s, 7s, 8s, and above, considered abnormally high. So this is probably a little bit high for U.S. standards. If this were the unemployment rate in the UK, Britain, if this were the unemployment rate in France, Spain, Italy, this is considered very, very low. If this were the unemployment rate in Nigeria, this is extremely low. So other nations in the world tend to have, there's some exceptions to this, but other nations in the world tend to have higher unemployment rates than the United States. There are a few exceptions to that, but Europe in particular, many parts of Africa, South America, Central America have unemployment rates much higher than this. The point is, what is high for one nation, the United States, is not high for other nations, say Britain, England. Okay? All right. Now, this again is the official rate. This is the process that is done monthly to arrive at an official unemployment rate for the United States. There's actually another unemployment rate called U6, and it's a modification of this particular model. As I said earlier, this is unemployed divided by what? Unemployed plus employed, right? Now, this is what U3, this is how you get the U3 unemployment rate. To get the U6 unemployment rate, we're going to actually add in a few things that we've left out. Okay? So what we're going to do to get U6 is we're going to take the unemployed plus we're going to add in the discouraged workers, and we're going to add in the underemployed. Underemployed. And we're going to call them underemployed worker. All right, so here's your typical unemployed. In our case, this is going to be people seeking and available, and this is also going to include the temporary layoffs. We're going to include the discouraged workers into the calculation, and we're going to include the underemployed, or what the U.S. Department of Labor calls the marginally employed. So this is the underemployed worker. Underemployed worker. We're going to divide that by the labor force, and we're going to add in the discouraged worker in the denominator. The UEW is already included in the labor force. Remember, the 500 people who are marginally employed are already counted down here. We don't have to add them again. Okay? So this is going to equal U6. So let's go ahead and run the numbers. And let me get this straightened out a little bit, move it over here a little bit. So again, let me rehearse these. This is the unemployed, discouraged workers, and underemployed workers over the labor force plus the discouraged workers. Okay, so let's see how this impacts the calculation. So the unemployed is still what? 550. The discouraged workers are 250. And the underemployed is 500. We're going to divide that by the labor force, which is 8550. We already got that up here. And we're going to add to that the discouraged worker number. We know this 500 is already included in the 8550. So what does this equal? If you grind this number out, this actually equals 14.8%. So this is a higher unemployment than what we see officially published by the government every month. Now, you can probably remember instances during the Great Depression, which occurred 2007, 2009, and the unemployment effects lasted long after that. But you can probably remember hearing data where the unemployment rate was in the teens. The national unemployment rate was quoted as being in the teens. And you even maybe read articles or heard, saw something on the internet or heard somebody on TV say that the real unemployment is actually 15% or the real unemployment is nearly 20%. Well, that's actually that's not true. As far as the government is concerned, the real unemployment is U3. That's the number that's has been used for a long time, and that's the number that most economists have arrived at is the best measure of unemployment. It has strengths, it has weaknesses, but if you want to actually measure unemployment in a voluntary market system where people have the right to work and also the right to not work, where companies have the right to hire and the right to not hire, that this unemployment is the best approximation. However, some people like to quote U6 because it looks worse. It does include the discouraged workers, people who have stopped looking and it does include the marginally unemployed, people that aren't working up to what they consider their desire. And so some people like this because they feel it's a better measure of the misery. Okay, so you'll see both numbers quoted, and you need to be careful which number is being referred to. And often, the person using the number isn't telling you which unemployment rate they're using, so this can sometimes be misleading. If I'm President Obama and I'm trying to defend my administration's during this, the last 6 years, let's say, I'm going to want to point to the progress that has been made in U3. Okay, and I'm going to show you some U3 data here in just a minute, and I'll show you how during President Obama's administration, U3 has dropped considerably. If I'm a critic of the president, I'm going to be more inclined to want to point to U6 because it looks worse, and it includes a broader definition of what we mean by unemployment. So again, it's going to matter on your perspective. You can always find data to support your position, and what we want to learn here in Principles of Macroeconomics, Introductory Macroeconomics, that the government collects different types of data, and we need to be careful with how that data is put together, and therefore what it means and what the implications are for policy. Okay? All right, I'd like to wrap this lesson up by showing you some actual unemployment data for the United States, and I'm not going to bore you much longer with numbers, I hope, but I'd like to show you some data for the United States. And what you're going to see here is the Obama years. I'm not going to show you the Clinton years and the Bush years. I've got data here for the Clinton years and for Bush 2 and for President Obama, but I just want to show you some data and just show you how this data is basically to be interpreted. So here's the year, and I'm going to use a U3 measure because that is traditionally what we use to look at unemployment. I've got 2009, first full year of President Obama's administration, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Now, of course, we're in 2015 right now. I'm doing this video in 2015, and so we have a January number. I'm actually this video is being done in February of 2015. I have a January number, one number for 2015, unemployment rate of 5.7%, but that's for 1 month. What I'm giving you here, though, are annual numbers. So in 2009, we have an unemployment rate of 9.3%, very high by U.S. standards. 9.6%, very high by U.S. standards. 8.9%, again, very high by U.S. standards. 8.1%, getting better, but still high by U.S. standards. 2013, 7.4%, still high by U.S. standards. 2014, 6.2%, still quite high by U.S. standards. 2015, I'll put a little asterisk beside that, 5.7%, January only. But the trend is looking better. You can see now we're under 6 in 2015, and again, in the U.S., 4 to 5% unemployment is considered normal. It's impossible in a market system like the United States to have 0% unemployment. That's impossible. That's an impossible macroeconomic goal. Why? Because people have the right to quit jobs, leave jobs. People also have the right to not be motivated to not respond to what are called alarm clocks, to have bad attitudes about work, where they have difficulty keeping jobs. They're actually people who are, sociopathic, antisocial. They have a very difficult time keeping jobs in the workplace. The moral of the story is you may have people out there who are seeking work and available for work, but they can't find a job because they can't keep a job. They have a bad work record. Or there are people who leave jobs for better opportunities. They have the skills, they have the values to find work. It just takes them a while to reslot in. There are information problems. They may leave their job, and then it may take them a while to find that other job that is a good fit for them. Okay? So in a dynamic market economy where workers have the right to work or not work, employers have the right to hire or not hire, you're going to always have some unemployment. I talk about this in later lessons. Frictional unemployment is the unemployment we have among skilled people who are between jobs looking for better opportunities. The United States also experiences, as does other nations, structural unemployment. This is where people actually lack the skills and or values to find work. They need either training, retraining, they may need an adjustment in their attitude. The point is, it's difficult for structurally unemployed people to find work because employers are not attracted to their skill set or to their personality or whatever. So in the United States, 4 to 5% historically has been considered normal. In other words, when the unemployment rate is in the neighborhood of 4 to 5%, policymakers at the national level are not concerned. So when unemployment is in the 4 to 5%, again, this is U3, the government isn't going to be talking about the unemployment problem. When do we begin talking about the unemployment problem? When it's above 5%. So you can see that the unemployment problem is becoming, in the public's mind, less of a problem because here of late the unemployment rate has dropped below 6%. You can see why the unemployment issue has been in the news quite a bit between 2009 to 2014 because unemployment rates by U.S. standards have been relatively high. Now, again, critics of the president will point to this and say it's his fault. Defenders of the president will say I inherited a recession. If you check the 2008 data out, which was the last year of George W. Bush's administration, you'll see that the unemployment rates were starting to get quite high by U.S. standards in 2008. So the President Obama, would probably argue that I inherited a mess, and it's taken us 5 to 6 years to get out of the mess. The Republicans, of course, are going to criticize the president for his unemployment record and perhaps argue that he didn't do enough. All right? That's the politics of it. In this course, we're interested in what is unemployment and how do you measure it. Okay. Well, I've gone on long enough, so I'm going to sign off. It's important that we understand and distinguish. One, there's a big difference between not working and unemployed. It's important that we know the difference between U3 and U6.